Serious people of Reddit that believe in the paranormal, ghosts, demons, angels, etc. What exactly happened to make you start believing? By Pledis_booze.
Wyoby says. When I was a kid I had an imaginary friend called Mr. Johnson. I would talk to and play with him all day, and my parents mostly ignored it because it seemed harmless. Well, one day while my mom was out watering the yard, a neighbor walked by and started a conversation. He said he was surprised that she moved in there because it was supposedly haunted, and that the previous tenant had died in the house. His name was Mr. Johnson. After that my parents got really uncomfortable when he'd talk to my friend and I eventually stopped interacting with him. I also have a very vivid memory of talking to something on a curtain rod in the same house. I can't remember what we were talking about, only that its voice was kind of raspy and weird. When my dad came in and asked WTF I was doing, I remember the thing saying God. So, I told my dad I was talking to God and thought the freaked out look he gave me was hilarious, even though I had no real understanding of what God was or why that was such a strange thing to say.
Just_a_hep7agon says, Edit, I do remember the address and I originally posted it. I deleted it because of sub-rules. If a mod tells me I can, I'll put it back. Otherwise, IDK, I guess if I'm allowed to DM it to you, ask. Also, while I did relay this exactly as I experienced it, I know kids are weird and unreliable. As far as I know, I just lived in an old, nasty house with a bug infestation. Maybe the landlord was trying to scare us into moving out. Our rent was late more than once, haha. When I was 10, my family moved to an old house in a small town. The night we moved in, I saw a dark figure in the master bedroom mirror behind me. A man in a wide-brimmed hat, but just a black silhouette. 2. Everyone in the house had vivid nightmares nearly every night the entire time we lived there. My younger brother couldn't sleep because of zombies in our room. 3. I had a bunk bed that was a twin on top and a double on the bottom. One night, dead asleep, I somehow flew so hard off the top bunk that I landed a good foot away from the bed without touching the bottom bunk, which jutted out over a foot from the top. 4. One morning, the kitchen floor was completely covered in maggots. 5. One morning, there was a mass of lizard corpses in the pantry, melted together in various stages of decay. There was no way it was there before, someone would have noticed. It was smelly and in plain sight. Finally, the trigger for my mom to say fuck this shit, I'm out. 6. There was a large building behind our house that had been some type of big shed. We didn't use it because there was a giant beehive basically taking up an entire wall. I don't remember who saw it first, but there was a blurry, white apparition in the building's window. A woman in an older, traditional dress, the kind with a headscarf and apron. She was looking to the left. All of us saw her, 4 people, and just stared for several minutes. I've blocked out a lot of that time in my life, but I remember enough to know there was something wrong with that house.
ShyberneticOrganism says, my home we bought is haunted. And it's been interesting because I am an astrophysicist by trade, and it's been interesting to take what I know to be true in the universe and place that with what I and my family live with. All that being said, we adore her. I have probably the friendliest, most helpful ghost in the world. When we bought the house we knew it was funky. Even weirder is 3 days after we moved in I realized that I had seen this house before from the angle I was sitting in on the couch. In my dreams over various years. Anyways, the first thing we noticed was little things. If we left lights in they would switch off. You would hear the click of the switch. I heard walking around in my son's room one day. Didn't think anything of it for a full 20 minutes and then realized fuck, I'm home alone. Like I heard his door open and walking around. Okay. Spooky but harmless. If we lose something and we audibly say it's missing within around half a day it will be found in plain sight on the table or couch. We always say thank you. Our cats will arch up and purr like someone is petting them. My daughter has been tucked in before. She thought it was me. Nope. We love her. The only thing we have issues with is no laundry machines past 9 p.m. We have locking front loaders. Once they are started, it's a bitch to get them open. If someone starts a late load, you will come down to the door open and machine off. Only past 9. So now we just respect it. I don't know who she is. But this is her home too. We love her and say thank you and talk to her. All of us do. Guests have told us our house is haunted without us telling them. My all-time favorite story is I have a friend who doesn't believe in ghosts and she spent the whole day talking mad shit. She retires to one of the guest rooms and within 20 minutes she comes down sobbing and her ear is bright red. She was half asleep and she heard soft movements in the whack someone flicked her ear hard. She doesn't talk shit anymore. Or stay over. That's the only time Our Lady has been aggressive. But I'm glad she is here. She is our family now, as creepy and weird and dumb as that sounds.
uhohzone says, my childhood best friend had a Rottweiler, Tyler, who passed away a few years before we started hanging out. One night, I spent the night at his house and woke up in the middle of the night to a Rottweiler staring me in the face. I thought it was his new Rottweiler, Rowdy, he had, so I went to pet it and my hand just went right through it. I told him about it the next morning and they said it was normal for them to see or hear him still roaming around the house every once in a while. I've had a few paranormal interactions since, but that was the one that solidified my beliefs.
Country Music Man says, my aunt used to live in an old, pre-Civil War house. The upstairs gave off a really creepy vibe to it. It wasn't used, so no one had any reason to go up there. A lot of the time her and I would leave to run errands, we would come back and all the lights would be on upstairs in every room. Mind you, she lived alone. Well, one night we both walked up there to turn them off, and as we rounded the corner on the steps we saw an old man at the top, and then he vanished right in front of both of us. My aunt and I both hightailed out of there as fast as we could. I didn't stay the night with her again until she moved out of that place.
Deleted says, was sitting on the couch downstairs and could hear someone walking loudly up the stairs. Problem is the stairs were on the other side of the room from where I was hearing this. Sound was clear as day. I went upstairs and as 21-year-old I fell asleep on my parents' bedroom floor that night. It freaked me out so bad. Next morning, of course, my mom is asking WTF am I sleeping in their room, and I explain I heard the stomping up the stairs but no stairs there, and her mouth gapped open. Damned it, the house hadn't been partially gutted and redone in 1989, 10 years before we moved in, and the stairs used to be exactly where I heard the stomping. I refused to believe my mom until we went upstairs, and sure enough she showed me there was an indent in the ceiling right where the wall partitioning the room from the stairs would have been. I never believed in anything like that before. I'm still not sure I do. I mean, if I didn't learn that the stairs had been there, I woulda thought I just went a bit nuts in the head for a minute instead of believing I was hearing ghosts or something, but the remodel moving stairs was just too much of a coincidence.
MalboroUsesBadBreath says, probably too late now for anyone to see this, but it's something that's always made me think. When my sister was a baby, she was always crying and would not sleep through the night unless she was in bed with my mom. My stepfather worked nights at a hospital, so he was not there when this occurred. Mom told me she woke up because she felt a hard, bony finger tapping on her shoulder. She woke with a start to this finger and realized in the night she had rolled on top of my sister and was suffocating her. If she had not woke up, my sister would have probably died. My mom turned around in a panic, thinking my stepdad had came home early and had poked her to wake her up, but he was not there, and wasn't there till the next morning. She swears to this day that an angel tapped her to wake her up to save my sister.
Purplepotatochip says, when I was 20 or so, I worked for a carpet cleaning service. It was really just me and the 2 other guys who started it. I eventually proved myself and they gave me a van and my own clients to work. So I head up into the rural Tennessee hills to do a job one morning. It was a private house. I spoke with a middle-aged woman who owned it and began my process. Pulling out the machine, hooking up to a water source, etc. As I make my way through the house, I noticed that the woman I spoke with was hanging out in the kitchen and there was the husband doing work in the garage and out front. No other signs of people in the house. In making my way down the main hallway straight into the master bedroom, I assumed. As I push the machine in the room, watching what I'm doing on the floor, I see an older woman out of the corner of my eye. She is wearing a white gown, standing up out of a chair in the far right corner of the room. I look up to apologize and I see her briskly walk around an alcove where this chair was. I could not see the right wall of this alcove, so I assumed it was an exit and she was simply leaving so I could finish. I continue and make my way to the alcove, and as I turn into it, I see that it is a closet with the door ajar and light off. My heart sank and I half-assed the rest of that job and booked it out of there. It never felt aggressive or anything, peaceful actually. Just an old soul hanging out, I guess. 15 years later and it's still so vivid in my mind.
HonestlyWow says, my mom told me this story a long time ago when I asked her if she ever had any weird experiences. She was in her apartment in her bed, no roommates, when she felt someone brushing her hair. Her mom would come over and do that often, so she assumed it was her and didn't look back. That's when the phone started ringing. She didn't get up until about a minute passed and the brushing stopped. She answered the phone and it was her mom.
MuddaFrmAnnudaBrudda says, okay, this happened when I was 6 and I am nearly 50 now, so my memory is a little hazy. I had a friend the same age as me called Kelly. We used to hang out together with other children who lived in our block and local area. One afternoon Kelly knocked on my door. I answered and she asked if I could go to the corner shop with her to get some bananas so that we could make a milkshake. Before I could answer, my stepmother called down the stairs to say I had to clean my room and was not going anywhere. Kelly kind of shrugged and said she was going anyway, and that was the last I saw of her. Early evening came and her mother had knocked on every door looking for her. All of the dads got together and went looking for her. It got later and later, and when I went to bed she had still not been found. In the early hours of the morning I heard a noise outside of my bedroom window, a kind of intermittent moaning. When I looked out, I saw a policeman was sat on the wall, sobbing and being comforted by another policeman. I watched for a while and then went downstairs. My dad told me Kelly had been found dead and the cops in front of our block. I later found out Kelly had been murdered by one of the older boys who hung out with us. I had to give a statement as I had seen Kelly the day before. Later police fed back that Kelly had been killed hours before she knocked on my door, and that my recollection of events was impossible. The man who owned the corner shop said Kelly had never come in to buy bananas. I'm pretty sure the police thought I was lying and that my mother was either lying as well or mistaken about what she'd heard. From that time onwards I have believed that Kelly came to visit one more time before she left for good, and since then the idea of the paranormal has just seemed normal.
Seedsky1 says, something very strange happened to me when I was roughly 15 years old. I lived in a house with my family all my life and was the house I grew up in. Anyways, so my parents bought the house when it went up for sale due to an old man passing away in it naturally. 20 years later we were looking at other houses and planning on moving due to the neighborhood changing for the worse. That's when weird shit starting happening. Somehow things started disappearing and relocating. Believe it or not, somehow a cucumber ended up on the sink in our bathroom upstairs, then a rock mysteriously appeared in my room on my bed, and the worst of it was one morning I was awoken by a very firm grasp on my inner thigh. No one was home and it wasn't a dream. Nothing too crazy, but I believed some type of spirit got attached to our family or something and didn't want us leaving. It certainly was real and no one could explain it.
UncleCoyote says, I thought that I struck and killed a girl that wasn't there. I was driving home late at night from a double shift, so admittedly I was tired. I had my radio blaring to keep awake. I was driving through the backwoods on a road that I had learned to take as the occasional shortcut. During the day the road was busy and congested, but at night it was always empty save for a stray deer or raccoon. I'm driving, jamming out, and admittedly speeding. I take a corner too quickly and there in front of me was a young girl about 19 or 20 with long dark hair wearing jeans and a light-colored blouse. For a split second I saw her eyes reflected in the headlights, saw the look of shock and fear on her face, and I swerved hard off the road and into a ditch. There was no way that I didn't hit her. I jumped out of the car, and started walking back to the spot I had last seen her and flagged down a passing car to tell them to call 911. This was in the days before everyone had cell phones. Cops came, EMT came, and there was no one. No body, no girl, and I was given a sobriety test on the spot. I get home much later than I should have and my wife is waiting for me as I hadn't arrived on time. I'm shaken as I can still see the girl's face in my head, and I recount the story to my wife, who goes white. She runs upstairs and grabs a yearbook and tells me to flip through the senior pictures. Page 3, there she is, looking exactly as I had seen and described her. I ask my wife if she knows the girl, or if she has hers or her family's number. That's when my wife informs me that the girl died 3 years prior during a hit and run on that exact curve. I wasn't from the area, there were no ghost stories involving that road, and I had no way of knowing that the girl that I picked out of a lineup of seniors was already dead. To this day I still wonder what happened. Was I turt? Had I heard her name or seen her face on a memorial newscast or clipping and not registered it, or had I actually encountered what to this very moment I still consider the most terrifying event in my life, as I honest to God thought I was going to jail? I'm not 100% positive, but I can say this, I can still see her face lit up by my headlights clear as a goddamn bell.
Grizzly_spirit says, I have a ghost that follows me. Not haunts, follows. She will close doors, fuck with lights, makes my room colder, make noises, sometimes I see her in my dreams, all kinds of shit. Most people don't believe me when I try to tell them, which is fine, but she doesn't like to be ignored. She will make herself known. She has done me no harm, so I respect her and am grateful for all she has done for me. Edit, she has also followed me across states when I've moved multiple times.
JungleCube18 says, I haven't really had anything happen to me as an adult that has reconfirmed my beliefs, but my mom always used to tell me stories of stuff that would happen to her when I was a baby and we were renting a specific house in the hills. She said unexplained things always used to happen to her after I was born. Such as taps turning on in the kitchen by themselves when she was sitting in the lounge room and could see the kitchen sink from where she was. Pictures would fall from the walls, but when she would look at the nail it was sticking out straight and not bent, therefore making the picture fall. The rocking chair in the lounge would often rock as though someone was in it. And the creepiest of all, if you ask me, she would hear footsteps go up the stairs and into the room above, my room, and hear something playing with all my toys. I was a tiny baby, so it wasn't me. Safe to say Mom never left me in a room on my own.
Neon_genius says, I remember this happening when I was younger. My uncle's family started having this weird feeling on their house, especially in the dining room, so they decided to have a priest bless the house. Since we live nearby, we were invited. The priest was spraying holy water in each room/section of the house. As he sprayed in the dining area, the glass dining table broke in half. Straight line through the middle, no shards whatsoever. My uncle said that after that, the weird feeling was gone. I lean more on science and logic these days, but this experience keeps me from completely dismissing the idea.
Pantheraxe says, I'm not overly religious, or religious at all really, but I have a solid belief in guardian angels. When I was younger I would have nightmares that would haunt me for months at a time, making it so that I would struggle to sleep for fear of the nightmares returning. Well, eventually I decided to try praying every night before bed, not to any deity in particular, just to my guardian angel. The night that I started praying was the night that the nightmares stopped. At first I thought it was just coincidence, but the next time that I had a nightmare was on a night when I had fallen asleep without praying. It's been 4 years and I still pray every night, still to my angel, and every night I get a peaceful rest.
No_seriously_fuck_you says, friends and I sat in the cemetery at midnight and recorded the silence with a little digital recorder. About 30 seconds in, you hear a voice whisper, "Come in to visit me tonight, in your sleep." Okay. We talk briefly, shortly after you hear the voice or whatever, and it is very easy to determine the major differences in the two. We had the recorder sitting like 4 or 5 feet away from us in the grass. That's the only thing I've ever experienced in this regard, and it's enough to have me believing, even if that's based solely on the fact that I can't explain it otherwise.
Ninovan says, my childhood home is haunted. Where my house is, there used to be another house. It burned down, and the father of the family who lived there died in the basement during the fire. The family sold the land, and the house was cleared away and a new house built over the old basement. My grandmother, who lives in the same town, knows the family. Anyways, my parents bought the new house when I was a toddler and we've lived there for 20 years. The ghost of the guy who died in the fire, named Charlie, lives in our house, and it's pretty obvious. My mom says that once, when she and my dad were arguing, she took to the bedroom to cool off. She said, "Charlie, I wish you could knock some sense into him." Not 5 minutes later, my dad starts swearing from the living room. The shelves above his chair had fallen and knocked him in the head. They've never fallen before or since. Any animal we have, a couple dogs when I was a kid, my cat now, will stare down the hallway for long stretches of time, then go bananas chasing something from the living room at one end to the bedrooms at the other, like they're playing with someone. I personally have heard footsteps, big, heavy footsteps, like someone wearing work boots, walk up and down the hallway, especially at night. It scared me as a kid, but now I just take it as Charlie checking on our safety. My grandmother, while visiting us one time, woke up in the guest bedroom to a shadow man standing in the doorway. She hid under the blanket for a few minutes, then decided it was safe. When she came out of the blanket, the shadow man was at her bedside, leaning over her. She hid under the blanket again until she fell asleep. The most concrete evidence for me was the time Charlie scared something off. My bedroom was always the coldest room in the house, and often I felt uncomfortable in there, like I was sitting next to someone who disliked me. One day, I went to grab clothes for a shower, and walked right into a wall of evil halfway down the hall. I can't describe it fully, nothing looked different, I just felt like I had physically crossed a barrier into a force field of hatred. I knew without a doubt in my body that I was in danger, and without thinking, I hauled ass to the opposite end of the house, to the kitchen. I stood at the stove, shaking. I was about 14, afraid to look down the hallway in case I saw whatever was down there, but afraid that if I didn't look, it would sneak up on me. I eventually convinced myself that I was being a baby, and started slowly through the dining room and towards the hall, afraid the entire time. All at once, I felt a strong breeze blow by my left side, going down the hall towards my room, like how it feels when someone runs by you and barely avoids running into you. And I thought for a second that I heard a man's voice. I continued down the hall, and I couldn't feel the evil anymore. I went into my room, and it felt lighter and more comfortable than it ever had in my life. I thanked Charlie, and from then on, I've never felt that uncomfortable feeling in my room. I think he protects it now. But yeah, growing up in a haunted house is pretty convincing emo.
Deleted says. I remember when I was 9 years old I used to hang this dumb paper chains in my room. I would just hang up pieces of paper on a wall, like decorations. Anyways, one day I was playing in the room and looked forward at my shadow and just stared at my shadow. For some reason it seemed a little off. Then the shadow proceeded to stretch up, or stand up, it's hard to describe, and a hand reaches up and knocked one of the papers off the wall, and it was taped up there pretty good. I remember freaking the fuck out and just bolted out of there into my grandma's room. Over time I got over that, but then 8 years later I remember telling my dad the story as a joke because I thought he would laugh, and his response was, "Oh yeah, you mean shadow people? Yeah, our family always sees that, especially the oldest in each family. I've seen it, my dad has seen it, my mom has seen it, and her mom etc. BTW, they are the oldest siblings in their family, as am I. I was scared of course, but thought he was fucking with me again, so I called my grandpa and grandma literally 10 minutes later about shadow people and they proceeded to tell me all these stories about being followed and scarier shit than I've experienced. It honestly freaked me the fuck out, and since then I try to look away from my shadow. Also, my grandma has a lot of shadow people stories but refuses to tell me because, as she has told me, I'm very sensitive and wouldn't be able to take it. She's not wrong.
Stayinclosetplease says. I just remembered another. We were celebrating one of my friend's birthdays and she lives in a military base. It was just us three and the 2 cats, and her parents were out of town. Her lights would randomly turn on throughout the house, and every time we were upstairs the basement door would violently slam shut. It was around 2:30 or 3 a.m. when we decided to go to bed. I was sleeping in the guest room and they were sleeping in her room. On our way up the stairs, the light went out on its own, and we heard the skittering noise across the living room floor below and coming up the stairs. It wasn't the sound of the cats, they were already on the bed in the guest room. My friend screamed and bolted into their room. I ran into mine, and when I shut the door I heard the skittering turn the corner and scurried across the floor down the hallway towards my door, thudding against it. After about half an hour of all three of us texting each other in a group chat about what the hell just happened, they decided to open their door to come sleep in the guest room with me. We were all terrified and thought about calling a cab to go back to my house. They told me it thudded on their door as well. Edit, I love how it's tagged serious yet everyone's trying to debunk this. Both cats were in the room with me. I went to the guest room because I wanted to make sure the cats were safe so I didn't follow my friends. They turned right into the first room down the hallway and slammed the door. I'll be damned if demons touch any kitties. Frown. Rats? This thing sounded like it weighed the same size as a large dog. Explain the door opening and closing violently with the windows shut. It didn't open just a crack, it fully swung open like someone kicked it open from the other side.
Stayinclosetplease says, I have a few. I fully believe something has been mimicking my mom for years. One night I was sitting on the couch with my dog watching TV at around 10:30 p.m., when suddenly I heard my mom call from her bedroom, which is right across the hallway from the stairs leading to the back door. She said, "Come here and let the dog out," which I thought was odd because the dog was with me. I didn't think much of it, so I turned around and tried to get the dog to move, and she wouldn't budge off the couch at all. Just as I was about to reply back saying the dog clearly didn't want to go outside, my eyes met the gaze of the orange streetlight outside, illuminating the empty driveway. Another time when I was still in high school, my best friend and I were on the bus heading back home. My friend nudged me, pointing at a silver car pulled over on the side of the road, probably within 1 to 2 minutes from my house. A familiar-looking decal was hanging from the rearview mirror and a woman was inside wearing a dark blue jacket with short curly brown hair, asking me if that was my mom. We both laughed because my mom is known for sitting in our driveway for up to 20 minutes on her phone before she comes through the door. So we both thought she couldn't wait until she got home from work to check, and we didn't think much of it. As the bus passed by my house, we both noticed my mom's car was boxed in between my dad's truck and my brother's cars, unable to move. Another day I was leaving my room to make some lunch when I heard my mom call to me from downstairs. At first I didn't hear her, so I moved closer to the steps and I hollered down to her, asking her to repeat herself once more. She sounded off and was asking me to come down to help her with the laundry, something she'd never do. Just as I was about to place my foot on the top step, I remembered my mom telling me she was going to be home later in the evening and that I was completely alone. Edit, to everyone mentioning it could be schizophrenia, explain why my friends can see/hear it as well, lol. I've had stories of friends coming over for the first time and they've told me they thought my mom was in the house, when in fact she wasn't. Believe it or not, I don't really care. This post is tagged serious, so I'm giving my serious answers.
Negabunny says, my mom had always told me stories about how she was 100% sure my biological paternal grandfather was watching over me. As a baby, we lived with my grandmother for a bit. My grandfather was a heavy smoker and my mom would often smell cigarette smoke in the house despite no one smoking. My deceased grandfather never lived in this house. Similarly, when we first moved into the house, one night my mom heard and saw the camera sitting on the dresser flash and take a photo. My mom assumed it was my dad taking a picture of us, but in the morning there was no photo and my dad said he never woke up. My mom attributed it to my grandfather capturing the moment. Cut to like 15 years later, my family moved to a different state, brand new house. I remember standing in the kitchen and saw a flash of white run across the kitchen, followed by the distinct smell of cigarettes. That's when I knew shit was real.
ModernPirate says. This just happened a couple days ago. I was never really a religious or spiritual person. I wouldn't say I'm a full-fledged atheist, maybe I am, or was, but anyway. My wife passed away 9 days ago. She was always more spiritual than I was, and she had a flair for some of the more macabre things, so among her possessions she had a deck of tarot cards. I had not seen this thing in years. It must have been tucked away somewhere, but our dog found it while I was out of the house, and when I came home there were cards everywhere, but the dog had only chewed up one card. All the others were intact, and it was so strange, and I had no clue what any of the cards are supposed to mean. So I googled it. The one card our dog chewed up and left on display for me to find when I got home was called the 5 Cups. It features a person in a black shroud looking at 3 cups that have spilled over in front of them, and they are so overcome with grief they fail to notice the 2 cups still standing behind them. It was just so strange and shocking to be presented with a tarot card about grief and loss, at that time, by our dog. Kinda wondering what's going to happen next.
Existentially_there says. Is there anyone who is a mixture of don't believe in it but like to stay away from it?
Lord_Waffle says. I once got a job to install a security system in an old house. The family that moved in there had a little 5-year-old-ish boy. The boy was playing around by himself, and he would sometimes ask random questions to what seemed like me. I answered one of his questions, and I remember him telling me, "Oh sorry, I was just talking to my friend." The mother poked her head in and told me that he had found a new friend since they moved in. She then leaned in closer and jokingly said, "It's actually kind of creepy." Well, later that day the boy was in the kitchen playing, and he was trying to reach a bag of chips on top of their fridge. I told him he should probably get down off the counter and I could get them down for him. He proceeds to get down and say, "Oh, my friend will get it." I just kind of shrugged it off and went back to working on running the cable through the wall. All of a sudden the bag of chips explodes on the floor. I turned around thinking the kid must have gotten back on the counter, but instead was on the floor picking up the chips. He gave me a look and said my friend accidentally knocked them off. I asked the boy where his friend was now, and he points on top of the fridge and said he is right up there smiling at you. I never got such a freaky chill in my life.
Sir_Jampot says. I dated a pagan girl. She wasn't over the top or anything. She was intelligent and interested in science, and yet also believed in paganism. Spending that amount of time with someone and seeing those beliefs made me more open-minded. Then there was one night that did it for me. Her house is haunted, all of her family believe it. I walked down in the night a lot of times, and it did always feel different somehow, and I could never bring myself to walk into the living room. Several times we'd heard voices in there and things falling off the sofa. Finally one night I woke up and she had just gotten back into bed, and she was visibly shaking even through the dark, and when I touched her she was in a cold sweat. She was never scared of the ghosts, but apparently she turned to walk up the staircase and saw something just sitting at the bottom staring at the door. Seeing someone that shaken and scared firsthand really changed my skepticism, and now I always find myself second guessing things to do with ghosts.
Sideswipem says. Had been seeing things in my room. Once, for a few seconds, I saw a little girl lying down face up sliding away from me. Another time woke up with a black mist creature thing with its face about an inch from me, and I would get weird, paranoid vibes in there to the point where I would get up and leave the room. Thought it was just me going crazy or something, until one day my roommate, I lived with 5 friends, said he saw me looking at him have sex with a girl through a hole in the door between our rooms. When they were through doing their thing, they confronted me about it, but in a funny, laughing it off way. But I had been in the living room for hours and we were the only ones home. When I went to my room, the lights were off and I saw that my roommate had put a sock in the door hole. After his girl left, we talked about it more and both got kinda creeped out when he realized I was telling the truth. That's when I figured it wasn't just me, and I started to believe right there and then. I've had more experiences since, but none as intense/realistic as in that room.
Deleted says. I am a Buddhist and I have personal evidence of the continuance of existence after death. In Buddhism there is neither a body nor a soul that continues. Eternalism, This is the doctrine of Anatta. What continues is more subtle. However, suffice to say that death is not the end of existence. I had not talked to my father for 18 years as he was a bipolar sufferer who self-medicated with alcohol and drugs and, in his rage and hatred, was sexually and physically abusive. My mother finally agreed to kick him out of the house and he moved into cheap accommodation, rented to him by the owner of the local corner shop where he'd bought his cheap booze for so many years. His eldest son, my half-brother, moved in too. My father killed him in an argument. Therefore I had not talked to my father since I was 18. In February 2017 I had 2 nights of vivid dreams where my father came and apologized to me. I felt great joy and peace alongside my forgiveness of how he'd personally treated me. This was in marked contrast to the nightmares about him I'd suffered sporadically before then. In October a solicitor got in touch to say that he died, alone and still in the grip of his addictions, in February. It took them a while to find us as me, my mother and my 3 siblings had all moved so they had to look for us, which was intentional. Those dreams could well have been a coincidence, but they were too emotionally important for that to be a satisfying answer.
Deleted says, I wrote about this a few years ago in /r/paranormal.
LeximusButtacus says, worked at the Winchester Mystery House in San Jose for a while, because I wasn't driving yet I took the bus regularly to work. This bus usually dropped me off excessively early, like 7 a.m. for my 8 a.m. shift. Sometimes I would meet up with the key holders for the house and help open it, turning on lights and opening doors and such. One of these occasions I ran into a man in white overalls in one of the rooms. I say good morning and go about my way. He nods and says good morning with a really thick accent, German, I think. No biggie, sometimes there are workers who show up early to retouch some part or another of the house. I hadn't seen this guy around but he might be newer. I mention it to the keyholder when I see him in one of the offices. He takes me to one of the workmen's sheds and points to a picture on the wall. Lo and behold, Terry's the workman with about 7 other people. The photo was dated to 1908. The tour guides named him Clyde. Stuff like that wasn't a daily occurrence but happened regularly enough, particularly in the early mornings. I got used to being respectful of the house, whatever inhabitants lived there. Enough so that when I put in my 2 weeks' notice I got a gift from Mrs. Winchester. She played the piano for me. I loved that house and it broke my heart to leave it. Edit formatting.
Espyeras says, one of my friend's places is 100% haunted. We would often hear the craziest of things. However, one instant there was all of us non-believers were in the house without her since she went to work, and we all saw someone or something move from one room to another past the hallway. And we knew we were the only ones there since her parents had divorced and since her dad dropped her off we knew something was off. We went to look into the room and saw nothing, but as we left we saw like the top of a head run past the window which was looking to the side of the house, looking like a little girl at the time. Biggest nope situation by all of us, jumped in one their cars, ignored that we were overloading by having us 3 in there and just left.
Mayonnaise88 says, I don't really know where my beliefs stand, but when I was 16 my sister spent her last few days in the hospital. I remember her close friend came to pick me up from school to see my sister. At this time I didn't know how serious my sister's condition was, but before we went to the hospital we swung by my house so I could get some things to take. I felt uneasy and my instinct told me something was wrong, so I started to cry. Of course I knew my eyes would dry out since I wore contact lenses, so I took my eye drops with me. A few days passed, it happened. My family stayed at the hospital to take care of everything and another family friend took me home. In this time, the last person to be at my home was Methought was the day I grabbed my eye drops. On the way home, despite being the saddest it'd been in my entire life, I remember my eyes becoming painfully dry due to the crying. Then, I remembered I left my eye drops on her bedside table. I remember very specifically, when I got home, the same bottle of eye drops, I only had one bottle, was on my desk in my bedroom. This was so shocking to me but somehow comforting because it gave me sense of possibility. I still can't explain it. Also, a bird just shit on my arm while I was typing this.
ItsSatineActually says, this is a little late, but the reason I believe in the supernatural is because of a traumatic experience as a kid. It was Easter Sunday, and my parents had set up an Easter egg hunt in the house for my brother and I. The eggs were all over the house, and my parents had put $1 coins in each of them. Even in their bedroom, our bedrooms, bathrooms, etc. My parents put us on a timer, and said anything we don't get after 30 minutes they would take back. My brother and I decided when the timer started, we would book it back to their bedroom because it was the furthest room from us, and we would work our way back. So my parents started the timer, and we ran up to their bedroom and into their bathroom. We scoured the shower, under the sink, etc. Then I shut the door, because Terry's a shelf that's hidden behind it with it open. There was an egg there, and we grabbed it, but the door locked behind us. My brother and I immediately panicked and tried to open the door and bang on it and started yelling that our parents were cheating, and they had done it on purpose. We were just playing and it was all giggles and fun. Then the room started shaking. I immediately got freaked out. I was only 8/9 at the time, my brother was 5/6. He was just kind of confused on why it was shaking. The blinds in the bathroom were shaking, and the windows started flashing with really, really bright lights outside. I thought we were going to die. I started screaming and crying immediately and banging on the door for real now, and finally, after about 10 seconds, my thoughts turned to keeping my brother safe. I opened up the cabinet door and started trying to shove him in there, because I remembered my teacher telling us about getting something to protect our heads if we had an earthquake. There was a really loud noise outside, like a lot of wind, and this really deep noise like something coming towards us. My brother was too big to get fully in the cabinet, but I sat down against it to try and hold the door shut, and I covered my head and closed my eyes and thought we were going to die. Then the bathroom door opened, and all of it stopped. My mom was looking super confused at me when I opened my eyes. I immediately jumped on her and hugged her and cried and yelling that it was an earthquake because that's the only explanation I had. My brother was stuck in the cabinet and she immediately freaked out and yelled for my dad, and he ran upstairs. My mom sat me on my bed and got my brother out, and he was crying and scared too. I told her what happened. She probably would have thought I was nuts, but my brother confirmed the lights, the shaking, and the scary-ass noise. She and my dad had absolutely no explanation on this, and she said they didn't hear us or any noise. They only came upstairs because there was like 5 minutes left on the timer and they thought something was wrong if we were still upstairs looking for eggs, or they would be nice and give us a hint to go downstairs. About a week later I told my neighbor about it. He was one of my favorite people because he was super funny and let us ride our bikes up his big driveway. When I told him about it, he immediately looked freaked out. He said that a long time ago, probably about 10 years ago, there was a bad plane crash in that neighborhood. I rode my bike back home and told my mom. She freaked out too, and looked it up, and it was true. Since then, I've believed in that shit.
Pyropingu says. So, I worked as a carer in UK in Sheffield. I'd worked in care for well over a year at this point, so was pretty well trained and used to the work by now. In a care job you see people die, or people who have died, and the first person to know was a carer, so death isn't anything I was particularly scared of as it's a natural course of life. Our company started with a new care package for a lady. We were a big company at the time, so we had lots of cares and lots of clients, which sadly meant the same careers didn't necessarily see the same clients day in day out. But with new management they were trying to stub this out and get some continuity to the care. So if only ever been to this last a couple times a week, usually in the morning or at lunch. I'd been rostered on for the whole week, all 4 visits, morn, lunch, tea, bed. So morning went well. Everything was fine. Her house was lovely, albeit a bit too big for her, seeing as though she lived in the living room and kitchen. Her bed was downstairs and so was a commode, which we emptied upstairs in one of the bathrooms. On a routine bed call usually consists, for this lady, washing, using commode, cup or tea, into nightie, into bed. So after everything was done we made sure to empty the commode upstairs. So I went through the living room, and opposite is a basement that's under the stairs. The first thing I noticed is it was unlocked and slightly open. Now I wouldn't think anything of it, but this lady lives alone, can't walk without help, nor does she have any family to visit her, and all our friends are sadly dead. I'm the only person she has seen all day, as I've been on her rota for the entire day. I shut the door, lock it with the bolt, then continue through the hall to get up the stairs. It's pitch black because it's winter and it's dark at 6 p.m. I switch the lights on as I go. I stop at the first step and look to the top. It's weird, I start to feel a pricking in the air, almost like static, and I have a sense of impending doom at the bottom of my stomach. I have to go up because this commode needs emptying, so I run up the stairs, trying so hard not to spill the commode, and head straight to the end of the hall, and I to the bathroom, empty it out, turn the light off, shut the door. Once I shut it, I heard a thud, almost like a body falling, me thinking the worst. I run downstairs and make sure the last hasn't fallen out of bed. She hadn't, but her armchair had moved closer to the bed, almost locking the door into the kitchen. Now I 100% I locked that door when I came in. I always do, so no one can come in. I moved the chair back to where it was, and it was almost like there was something shoving it. It was difficult to move, but it's never usually like this. The lady turns to me and says, "Oh no dear, you can leave it there, Harold likes to sit there." I just sort of stop, not thinking I heard her right. I know her husband was called Harold. So I left it as she said and rather quickly made my way out the house. When locking the door, I distinctly heard a male voice and the lady laughing. I never went back in the house.
Crime4N says, my grandparents' mother's side live in East Texas, and their house is built from the remnants of torn-down pre-Texas independence homes. So there are all kinds of creepy things that happen there. The creepiest is when you climb the stairs in the middle of the night and there are a pair of deep red eyes that follow you. That makes you a believer real quick.
NitemareLucifer says, being actually serious right now, but I was home alone overnight while my parents went somewhere. IDK concert, I think. I'm usually paranoid already, and kept flinching calls. Lol, home alone and tiny sounds felt like someone was there. The usual amount of anxiety you would have if you're already afraid of the night. Kept telling myself nothing is there, I'm just being irrational, despite the constant feeling of someone staring into the back of my head. But when I woke up in the morning, I had a bruise in the exact shape of a large hand on my thigh. There was so possible way it could have been self-inflicted. It was a right side up right-handed bruise twice the size of my own hand on my right thigh. My hand would have had to have been broken and flattened to position it where the bruise was. My parents are convinced I probably fell the day before, but nah man, I'm a ginger, I bruise within minutes guaranteed or your money back. From that point on I don't fuck with the paranormal, and now I cleanse my room and renew the seals on all 4 of my walls every month. By far the most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me.
MandBoy says, a long time ago I spent a lot of my time at one of my friend's place. We would play computer games together, board games, Warhammers, etc. etc. But when it became evening, I always had a feeling of something being wrong. I pressed the issue once and was told this is a death home, which to be quite honest was not the answer I was hoping for. Weeks passed by, and I dropped by almost every weekend, but one summer night I was awoke and shit in the night, feeling terribly, sweating, wobbly and with a fierce need to take a piss. I got out of the bed still feeling like crap, opened the door and looking down the hallway where my eyes laid upon a ghostly figure which freaked me the fuck out, closed the door again, waited a few minutes and then made my way to the toilet. I am not a believer of ghosts, but I have no other explanation for that shit.
_Aronach says, I've always been spiritually sensitive, more in sensing presences and seeing things than hearing anything, and on top of that I've been raised in fairy lore from my grandmother who called me her little druid. I've encountered/interacted with no less than 8 entities in my life, including the thing that I blame for said grandmother's death. Leaving work to go home now. If people want stories or more info in general, I will be happy to once I have time. Edit, I woke up to a ton of replies, so as promised, here goes, and thanks for taking interest. Most of my experiences were pretty general as a child, knowing, with certainty that I was not alone in certain places, seeing the family cat around the house who had died 2 years previous, etc., but the first major one that happened to me was probably also the worst. July 4, 2002. My mother and I were leaving my grandparents' place for some errand, and the road from home is laid out in such a way that you drive by the house again once you're on the main road. Something made both of us look back at the house together, and there was a shadow crouched on the roof of our house. It was sitting like the thinker, and look at its hand. Full July sun, and this thing on the roof was Venta black. I had a shiver pass down my spine, like I had just seen something I shouldn't have. Mom and I traded looks like, did you? Yeah. Don't tell Nanny, this would freak her out bad. We finished our errand and got home, and I stayed a little back and listened when Mom asked Nanny, in general terms, what a shadow like this would be. My family is Irish, deeply so, and Nanny was Arfile, pronounced Phila, which means storykeeper. Her response was, that sounds like a Tommyknocker. They come and knock on windows and doors to get you to open them, so they can come in the house and let in the banshee when it's time for someone to die. Nanny fell asleep mid-sentence on a car ride that night. The doctor said the stroke would have killed 9/10 people, and the 4 small ones immediately after would have gotten the last guy. She lost all control of her right side and died, peacefully, 2.5 years later. I've seen that shadow 4 times in my life, and something awful happened, that I'm aware of, 3 times. The second was in November the year after the first time. I woke out of a dead sleep, not sure what time it was. You could see the portion of roof the thing was on in the last sighting from my window, and that same thing was peeking over the side of the house at me. Black fingers gripping the roof molding, and ahead I could see because it was darker than the night sky behind it. It had purest white eyes with no pupil, and I felt I was staring at death itself. In the most badass moment in my life, I said, you shouldn't be here, go away, rolled over, and went back to sleep. A week to the day after that sighting, my dog went from fine, to dying from leukemia. Panting, heaving, and crying because he didn't have enough red blood cells left to function. The following summer, around 2 a.m. I saw a shadow dart into my mother's room while I was walking back to mine after grabbing a drink. It was just a momentary thing, but I know I saw something. I woke Mom and she got worried when I told her, but we carried on. She had been hiding gallbladder problems from me to keep me from getting worried, and she began jaundicing a couple days later. Yellow like a Simpsons character before she went in for surgery. Doctors told her had she waited any longer she would have died. Then many years of nothing. I made contact with a bunch of other things between then and now. Mostly just people, some spirits tied to natural locations, etc. I was hired at a hospital in town as a second shift housekeeper. The hospital in town is haunted as hell. In particular, I didn't like the cancer center and the kitchens. The cancer center in particular was a horrible place, not by reputation. The nurses and doctors there are truly kind and go out of their way to make the patients feel better. I would walk into the area and almost immediately be hit with a wave of hostility and unease so strong I would stop and shiver for a moment every time it hit me. After telling some co-workers, I learned the area has had a reputation for bad feelings and seeing things for years, which makes sense, as it was in the same location as the original hospital building was 120-ish years ago. When I had to clean in the cancer center, I learned about it. It woke up around 10 p.m. every night, and seemed to have the greatest sway in one half of the unit. I tried my hardest to have that half done before sundown, but couldn't always for various reasons. One of those nights I was vacuuming a long hallway around 10:30 and turned right with the hall. After the turn, the hallway continued a ways, led out into the waiting room, and directly across from me, maybe 50 feet distant, was a door that led to the service elevator and staff-only stairs. I saw that same shadow standing there too. It was human-shaped, maybe 7 feet tall and about 2 or 2.5 feet thick at the hip and shoulder. Its consistency was as if a shadow had peeled itself off the wall. It was facing away, and looked back at me over its left shoulder with those same pure white eyes, and stepped through the door. The hospital I work at is a Catholic institution, run by nuns until a few decades ago, but they still visit to make sure the administration is keeping their word to not change how things are run. I say this to let you know that there is a chapel in the building. I also know this is one of the good ones, more on that later. Being a housekeeper, glorified janitor, really, I had keys to more or less the whole building. I left a note in the priest's prep room about the shadow, and how I felt it was necessary to bless the cancer center. The priest went to my boss, who got me in pretty massive trouble. Our department head is a Mormon, who is of the belief that there are no spirits or things of that nature out there. Period. Apparently, I was supposed to go to him with this issue, and to let him make contact with the priest. Yeah, sure dude. That fixed it too, for about 2 weeks. I noticed that the presence, that hostility, worked its way back out from a particular office, taking about 3 weeks to completely take the place over again. It was blessed about 3 times in total, with myself and the girl who had the area as her assigned spot present each time, each with the same result. Eventually an older lady took that girl's place, and cancer felt clean after that. I don't know what she did, but it drove that thing off.
ShrapnelDJ says, when I was about 5 I had a dream one night which involved the whole of my family. We took my grandma out to go shopping, wheeling her there in her wheelchair, but for some reason left her in a room with just a hanging light in it. We then spent the rest of the dream shopping and then came back to get her, only she wasn't there, just her wheelchair. We searched high and low for her but she was nowhere to be found. This was traumatic enough for me to wake up and my mother was sat by my bed and she asked me what was wrong. I told her about the dream and she burst into tears. It turns out my grandma had died that night.
Jerkomp says, parents went out to eat late night around 11 to 12 and I was home with my sister and grandma. My grandma and sister were asleep beside me and I was up with my TV on, was scared of the dark, while on my PSP in my room. Great times, all of a sudden I hear the door lock shuffle and open which I believe now I guess my parents are back and continued on playing on my PSP. I hear the door closes and I see the light of my living room turn on. A minute passes and I hear no sound. I would expect to hear my parents talk so I looked up again towards my door and see the light still on. My room was on the left side of the hallway and my parents' room was further down the hallway beside me. All of a sudden I hear footsteps coming towards my room and I got a really nervous feeling because I felt like it was probably an intruder cause the footsteps were heavy like. I blankly stared at my door and hallway wall in front of my door and I see the shadow of a man. Medium hair combed to the side like a businessman and a small pointy looking nose and a nice jawline and skinny body. I just see the shadow go from right to left from the hallway wall in front of my door and I'm like what? I didn't see anyone cross my door. I stayed put and it was quiet. I stood still in my bed for like 4 minutes before I got up and went to see what's happening. I look down the hallway to my left and see no one. I went to my parents' room and see no one and also checked the bathroom. I was really spooked out and went back to my room and hid in my blanket alongside my sis and grandma. I kept this experience and told my mom about it when we moved out and she told me I probably saw the man that died in the house. She told me before my dad and her entered the house, the landlord told her a guy died there and is haunted by him. Once she told me this, everything clicked. I also heard knocks coming from the attic that was in the hallway ceiling that would wake me up at 2 o'clock in the morning and I was convinced that it was a ghost. It must have been the guy I saw the shadow of, up there.
rxpharmd says, I am a pharmacist. One day while working, I waited on one of my regular customers. He was about 80 years old, and relatively healthy for his age. He came in routinely to pick up his lisinopril/HCDZ and atorvastatin. Usually, he didn't have the best attitude towards any of the staff. This day was unlike any other. We started chatting when he had come in to pick up his medications, and he mentioned that he'd be moving soon, away from the area. He reiterated many times that he had no idea where he'd be going, but that he wouldn't be here in our town anymore. He kept thanking us for all that we had done for him over the years, and he even apologized for giving us a hard time. About 3 weeks later, I'd received a fax from an accounting office requesting this patient's records regarding total dollars spent on medication. This is fairly common, as in many cases that amount is tax deductible. The thing that struck oddly to me is that the request was made on behalf of a trust. Also, not uncommon but sort of odd. I called the accounting office to discuss the request only to find out that the patient had died 2 months prior to his last visit to my pharmacy. My heart sank, even though our exchange during his visit was good. I thought that I'd been confused about the dates, but I verified his signature for the prescription pickup. And sure enough, the date and time were well after his time of death. After that encounter, I believe, it actually made me very emotionally satisfied that he'd come to make amends with us. We were seemingly important enough to him that he came to us to set things right.
Deleted says, there are lots of things, but here's one of the earliest. I started having dreams when I was 12, and one random sentence from the dream would unexpectedly turn up in real life a few weeks later. It was never anything important, just a few words. I told my mom about it. She said that used to happen to her when she was 12 to 13. Later I asked my dad and he said the same thing, that around 12 to 13 he started having dreams that predicted a tiny amount of the future. When my sister turned 12 a few years later, she also began having them. So basically, my family has the most useless bloodline ability in history.
Slootcio says, I used to work at a movie theater and there was a lot of weird shit that happened there. I was a manager, so I had to close down the theater often at 3 a.m. and was one of the only ones who could access different parts of the theater for safety reasons, such as the ceilings above the auditoriums to change lights. One night I'm the literal only manager on duty and the only one with access to a catwalk that was above the lobby ceiling. This catwalk has most of the server equipment for the television displays of ticket times on it. One day the whole system just gets buggy and turns off. I run up there to try to reset it and notice the box that powered the TVs is unplugged. Note, I'm the only one with keys and thus access to this room. So, obviously I'm looking for foul play if someone broke into here to mess with me. Lots of dingus work at the theater and we had a lot of fun. But all available hiding spots were empty and I was alone. One night myself and a fellow manager were closing the theater on a super busy Saturday night, pretty sure it was one of the Hobbit movies. Theater is locked and no customers are in there and I'm walking around turning off everything in a breaker room. I think I hear running outside the room and I assume my coworker is finished upstairs. I radio him to turn off games while he's down here and he radios back, man, I'm almost finished upstairs. So that freaked me out because we have had cases where people try to sneak into the theater at night, so I bust through the door and think I see a girl's foot zooming into one of the theaters. I ask him if he had turned off the lights in Theater 3, the one the girl went in, and he said he had. Now I assumed the girl couldn't see and would have a hard time looking for a place to hide, so I told him to leave them off because I think a girl is in there and to shine a booth light to look for her. He radios me I see her laying down in the middle top row, so I tell him to flick on the lights and I storm in there ready to yell at her. I get to the row and there's no one there. I look around and realize I was played, so I walkied up to the booth. Haha, you got me. But as I look up I see him in the booth window, jaw dropped. This sent a chill down my spine because I've had to fight off a lot of drugged up people in the lobby and theaters, and for some reason I felt as if I was about to be attacked. I whipped around in preparation of probable scratches and biting, but there was no one there. He walkies me, dude, what the fuck? I asked what happened and he was too shaken to answer, so I asked him where she went and he was pointing at the screen. I ran over to it and opened it up so I could get behind there to drag this girl out. I kept saying I was about to call the police if she didn't hurry up and get the fuck out, but as I got behind there was nothing. I hear, did you get her? From the coworker on the walkie, and I told him she wasn't in here and if he was sure. Then when I looked out into the auditorium and at the exit doors I saw her. Naked as all hell, but like pale. Grossly pale, and just standing in the doorway. I looked away to get my leg over the front of the screen room and she was now like 20 feet closer. Now I could tell more of her, and I still remember how there was just this naked girl standing there and I shouted at her and she flinched and bolted and I immediately followed. I was gaining on her when she turned the corner and into an empty hallway, and as I rounded she was gone. Fucking poof. I immediately went over to the cameras and checked the footage to see where she went, and literally the only thing I see in the hallway camera was me running out of the auditorium and stopping in disbelief. No lady, nothing. Just me. I sat there in disbelief for about 5 minutes until my coworker said I'm too scared to come down alone. And we closed up shop together.
MsMcClane says, well, there's the time I got grabbed in an empty room. The time my mom and her friends set off a Ouija board. The time I set off a Ouija board. The time 4 different cats watched something invisible walk around the living room for 15 to 20 minutes after it went psst in my ear. The times my brother and I heard giggling in the walls and bedroom ceilings on completely separate occasions. The time something wearing my face stalked my friends for 15 minutes back in high school. The time something moved an iron across the laundry room. And that was the most recent one. I have more, but those are the ones I tell most often. There's enough evidence from other parties to prove that I'm not hallucinating anything.
Ax2USN says, grandparents raised 7 girls, and all 7 experienced that curious connection known as twin bond. Constantly aware of each other. Mom was 6th of 7, and the most empathic. Growing up, I saw her stop in the midst of activities and run to phone to call grandma or aunties. Always an accurate perception of emotional or physical glitch with them. Once, the sisters saved grandma's life. I'll never forget that one. Her bond with me even more powerful. Driving on Highway 395, in county work car, 30 miles from home, when I hear her voice change lanes now. Startled, I did exactly that. And a 40-foot length of pipe slid off semi-truck in front of me. It would have skewered me. Stopped by her house after work, and as I walk through front door she says, how many times have I told you to not follow 18-wheelers? Uck. Hi Mom. Needless to say, I didn't get away with anything as a kid. Or as adult. Dang, I miss her.
MikePoland says. This was a few years ago back in Florida. We were helping friends look for houses to buy. I decided to tag along because they were going to this big house with a few acres and a stream and all. The house is well lit up. We noticed some rodent droppings, nothing a few traps wouldn't fix. The house looked wonderful. We saw a closed door that was jammed shut. I got afraid, but everyone else wanted to open it. I didn't want to be alone, not even outside. Everything started to seem very cold and had a bad feeling altogether. When we opened the door, it was so strange. It had windows, and it was about 2 p.m., however it was so dark in that room. I didn't even step a foot in it. Everyone else felt worried. No one took a step in it. We closed the door and left. Didn't check out any more of the house, the yard, or the barn, which at first looked nice, but now looks scary. That house was off the list. I still remember the feeling of that room and how it turned everything dark.
Kittendamn says, this used to happen at my childhood home maybe 10 years ago. I would always hear knocking on the walls of the house. At first I just thought it was my sister just doing it, so I would knock back and forth with what I thought was her. One day after school, I was in my room doing homework when I got 3 knocks on my door. It was usually my stepmom knocking and then asking if she could come in. So I waited for a response and nothing. It turned out I was home alone. So that freaked me out. I still continued to knock back and forth with it, as did my sister, not sure why we did, but nothing really happened. It stopped after probably a few months. Other things that occurred in the house. We had a little rocking chair in the living room with a stuffed bear sitting on it, and it just decided to fall straight forward out of nowhere. Everyone in the room saw it and kinda freaked out a bit. Families in the living room watching TV and the overhead oven fan comes on all by itself. The last things that's happened to me, happened at a different house. My friends and I were all sitting against the wall on my bed, and out of nowhere, a loud bang hits the wall and light drags all the way down the side of the house. Keep in mind, I lived in the middle of nowhere, like 30 minutes from town nowhere, So Terry's no way it was someone fucking with us.
Moniku says, I was sitting in my great-grandmother's recliner we were given when she passed, and I was ignoring my dad while he was asking me to clean up the area around me. I told him he'll do it later, and right as I finished my sentence the chair buckled forward, almost throwing me off. Pretty sure it was a grandmother telling me to get off my arse and listen to my dad.
Hammy131 says, I doubt anyone will see this now, but I was a deputy sheriff in rural West Virginia. I responded to a car accident at about 3 a.m. one night in the middle of nowhere. I did CPR on the girl until medics arrived, and as soon as they got there she died. 2 weeks later I'm on day shift but picking up overtime doing DUI patrol, and a call comes out of possible cat a woman in the road. All the other guys were tied up with either arrests or a pursuit from earlier, so I yelled at dispatch and told them I'd check it on patrol. Well, I drive out that same long dark gravel road. When I say it's in the middle of nowhere, I mean it. Our radios don't even pick up out there. Anyways, I pull up and this girl is walking away from me. I spotlight her and then call out to her, and she keeps walking toward the grassy bank where the accident happened. I'm following her and she walks over the bank and down the other side about 15 feet from me. When I get to the top of the bank and look over, nothing, just a calm creek flowing. I still think that was the girl from the accident to this day, because on a side note I met her mother about another 2 weeks after that and had lost my brother in a car accident. So I was giving her the same old story of I know what you're going through, I know it's hard, etc., and her mom tells me that her daughter came to see her one night and told her she was still alive when I got there and that I stayed with her until she passed and did everything I could to help her. No one knew I did that, and it wasn't in any of the police reports. Just kind of makes me wonder.
bondedboundbeautiful says, my parents live in a tiny town and I start having to drive out to visit at nighttime, as I work during the day. Driving in the dark doesn't bother me at all. One trip out, it's dark and I'm driving past a rundown barn. There are lots of abandoned homesteads in rural Alberta. I see a man hitchhiking on the road past this barn. I think I'm just tired and seeing things, so I slow down and really look. It's definitely a man, nothing wrong. He smiles and waves. I don't pick him up as I'm a small girl alone and he's about 1 kilometer from the next town. I have a nice visit and forget all about it. The next time I'm driving out, and it's dark, I see the same fricking man walking past the same fricking barn. I slow down again because I'm thinking I must be losing it. He smiles and waves again. I hightail it out of there, and anytime I drive out at night now I take a different route. There was nothing remarkable about him, indistinguishable clothes, didn't get any weird hair standing on end moment seeing him. He stayed in my rearview mirror the whole time, but I know it was the same man. Months apart, different times of night. I'm what you'd call a skeptic, but I can't explain this one.
Theimperfectionista says, my parents told me that when I was a baby, I used to stand up in my cot late at night and point and talk to something in the corner of my room. It happened nearly every night. I would laugh and babble, so I would assume it was a benevolent entity, if it wasn't something invented by a 1-year-old baby's imagination. It used to scare the shit out of my mom though, so much so that she would send dad in to tend to me on those nights. All throughout my life, sometimes I will wake up to what feels like something sitting on my bed and standing up, so that the bed decompresses. It could just be a dream, but I've never had any other experiences like that, as in I always feel clearly the distinction between reality and dreaming, except for this. I don't know if I believe or not, but those nights when that happens, I nearly wet myself from fear. When I do think I've definitely felt like something was sitting on my bed, I always wonder if it was the presence that apparently visited me as a baby. Maybe an ancestor or something, as I have always been vaguely aware of a protective spirit or something like that watching over me.
Shiagarath_4201 says, I'm still grappling with my beliefs. I'm a pretty rational, skeptical person. I was absolutely convinced the universe is a mundane void, completely devoid of any sort of supernatural influence. I thought the human mind was just an organic computer, and that life absolutely ended with death. Then my grandfather died, and I experienced some shit that I can't rationally explain. I'm still not sure exactly how I feel, or how to explain it. Ghosts just don't make sense scientifically, so what gives? Why aren't there ghosts absolutely everywhere if everyone who died lived on? I still haven't exactly made my mind up in the matter, so I might not be eligible for this question, but yeah, there it is.
Caramiapple says, the tipping point was seeing a big ball of light floating in my living room. No logical reasons to it. To elaborate, there's more to it. At first it was just a few one-piece figures I had. Every morning they changed position. I assumed my brother was pranking me, but he was adamant it wasn't him, and getting in my room means taking very creaky loud stairs. Given my light sleeping habits, it was almost impossible for him not to get caught at some point. It also happened when he slept over at a friend's, so the only logical explanation to it all was gone. Then there were footsteps. From my place at the desk I can overlook the corridor. I have a view on the only other room's door, so the only other live people in the house couldn't walk around without me noticing them at night. So obviously footsteps from the corridor when my room is open with a view on it and nobody is there, multiple nights in a row? I started getting creeped out, though I didn't believe in ghosts. Then stuff that had been staying on my shelves for years without moving started falling on me. Finally I got up one night to get a snack in the kitchen and there was some big ball of light floating there. Kind of transparent, maybe 1 meter of diameter, with tiny flecks of light just dancing around it. Couldn't deny it anymore there. My reaction was to go hide in my room, and it was gone by morning, which is when I tried to look up what it was and all. Since then I've also once heard a lot of footsteps and a bunch of men talking in my living room in hushed voices. When I went to check it out, they suddenly stopped and the room felt very wrong, like I should get out of there ASAP, which I did. When I passed the threshold back to the corridor, the voices picked up again. It felt like I interrupted a conversation. I also once went on a tour of underground galleries in an old medieval town. Where I was trailing behind a little, I was the last person in the group. As we turned in a different corridor, I saw a lady all in white standing not too far away behind us. It all felt very peaceful though. Usually I'm pretty scared, but here it was a totally different feeling of calm and happiness. Obviously the first big oh wow they exist encounter changed a lot of my worldview, since I was a firm believer paranormal stuff was BS. I also don't care if people assume I'm crazy for it. I know what I saw / heard / felt, and I'd rather know as much as I can on it all to keep myself safe.
Gooseluck says, I've had a few things happen in my life, but my most vivid one was a few years ago, before I was married and had kids, and it was me and my boxer dog. Anyway, I got a phone call from a friend at 11 p.m. She was out with our other friends from work and wanted me to come and meet them. She was blowing off some steam due to having an argument with her husband during the week. I agreed to go. I really couldn't be asked, but thought I should do the right thing. I got dressed and walked outside, expecting the sensor light didn't come on, but it didn't. Whilst wondering why it didn't turn on, I tripped over my sleeping dog. Now, my dog does not sleep outside, and when I tripped over her she didn't stir. When I got up from the ground I could smell my dead uncle's aftershave so strongly I thought I was having a dream. Then everything went dead quiet. Not a sound. I spoke to my uncle and said, should I not go anywhere tonight, Mike? After saying this out loud I could hear the normal night traffic and my dog woke up. So went out. I should have heeded that warning. It was a very tumultuous / scary night. I have always followed these warnings since.
Selenite511 says, when I was about 5 years old, I woke up one night to find 2 figures standing in my room. Although I was scared, the figures appeared calm and watchful and curious. I sometimes covered my eyes with my hands, peeking through my fingers and hoping they would go away, but they stayed. Also, being 5 years old, whenever I had a bad dream, I would just call my mom's name once or twice and she would wake up immediately. She was a very light sleeper and could hear anything from my room easily. In this case, I screamed for my mom for what felt like 20 minutes. Nothing happened, except that the 2 figures continued to stand in the center of my room and curiously stare at me. Side note, they also didn't look human. Anyway, after an extended amount of time, my mom finally heard me. As soon as she was about to open the door, they vanished. This experience totally changed my life. As a kid, I thought seeing ghosts or apparitions in your room was normal. I've had other supernatural things happen since then, and that's built me into a believer in the unexplained. Looking back now as an adult, it couldn't have been sleep paralysis since I was able to move freely.
Super Subwoofer says, well, I'm pretty late to this, but I do actually have multiple stories pertaining to this. However, here's the one that solidified my belief. About 5 or 6 years ago, I was taking on odd jobs alongside my retail job just to make some extra cash. One of the odd jobs I decided to take was a ghost tour guide in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. For anyone who is unaware, Gettysburg is notoriously haunted and ghost tour companies are all over the place. The particular company I was working for did those ghost investigation type tours, where you go out with equipment and ask questions and try to get reactions from the ghosts. The place I worked for was very new but gaining a lot of popularity because our Yelp and TripAdvisor ratings were immaculate. The tours were fun, I made a good wage and even better tips. One night in particular made me quit for good. I took a huge group of people out, around 25 to 30 people total in our group. Since it was so big, another guide accompanied me and we split the group. We would go to the area in which we were investigating and we would split the group among the different investigation areas. Everything was going rather well and we had a very diverse group, which always made the tours such an enjoyable experience both for me and the customers. My group was a Russian family, some southern tourists, and some tourists from NYC. The difference in beliefs made this night particularly fun, and at the start of every tour we would ask who believes in what, go over tips to experiencing something, and just general safety / how the equipment works. Having a wonderful night with my guests, we decide to use a ghost box. Now, if you aren't familiar with this seemingly dumbass invention, it basically plays FM signals backwards so you can hear EVP. We're in a circle and asking questions individually to see if we can hear a voice out of this amazingly horrible to hear device. When someone asks if anyone is there and we hear a very clear hello. Obviously, we're spooked, but figure someone is fucking with the group, and one of the southern women I'm with is saying some not today Satan prayer shit, I don't know. Then, we start hearing full sentences, clearly being formed via static coming out of Jimmy's genuine ghost translator that says I will hurt Super Subwoofer if he leaves. Okay, point taken demon. Then, this very interested African American kid beside me, asks what it said. The voice begins repeating Justin cannot leave, Justin cannot leave, Justin cannot leave. So fuck that, I turned it off, decided we're in Gettysburg not Amityville, and switch places with the other group. As we're walking to the next spot, the kid who asked what the voice said comes up to me and says, can I stay by you? I'm not really comfortable anymore. I understand why he'd be freaked out, but I ask him what's going on. Then he looks at me with probably the most worried face I've ever seen, aside from my cat wanting food, and says my name is Justin. I haven't told anyone that here. I had been present with this portion of the group the whole night, listening to every conversation necessary with these tours to make sure everyone is comfortable, and could verify that I hadn't heard him tell anyone that. After the tour, I took my cut of the tour, plus the tips I received for properly scaring the ever-loving shit out of some kid, called my boss, and told her that I would not be doing any more ghost tours. For nights on end, I could not sleep without thinking about the voice. I also have an analog record me and like 3 friends did out there and have yet to listen to it. That's a big old nope for me. Edit, grammar and stuff. Also, to put this edit explanation in, because I'm good at Reddit.
Lady ACW says. Late to the party. My husband, soulmate, partner for life passed away in 2005. At the time our son together was 4. I was distraught and had to grieve silently while I cared for our son and my other child. For about 6 months after he passed, I felt like he was still with me. I had a constant feeling of being watched. It unnerved me to the point that I kept all the lights in the house at night. It's a feeling I never had before or since. My 4-year-old slept with me, and when we'd go to bed, he would sit at the top of the bed and sing to me. The songs he would sing were not anything I'd ever heard him say before, and nothing that a 4-year-old would come up with. I can't remember the exact words, but one of them was like, "You are my queen and I am your king and I will love you for eternity." I figured my husband was telling him what to say. One night I decided to use a voice recorder in our bedroom just to see if I could pick up an of. When I played the recording back, I heard a distinct voice say, "Talk to me, baby." It was something he would have said to me when he was alive. After about 6 months, I no longer felt his presence, or felt like I was being watched. The experience was creepy, but I knew that he'd never hurt any of us. I figured he was just hanging around to make sure that we were all okay.
_Talls says, my sister and her husband bought the oldest house in their small town, built in the 1700s. During the Civil War, it was converted into a makeshift hospital. Well, the room that I'd stay in when I'd visit was, unbeknownst to me, where a few soldiers had succumbed to their injuries. The house obviously was old and noises came with the territory. But I distinctly remember a handful of times seeing a dark figure pacing in the room, eventually disappearing as if to go upstairs. Same sister, her husband and I made a tradition to go to Gettysburg during Thanksgiving break. First time visiting, I had to be around 12. We did the normal touristy stuff, ghost tours and whatnot. Her husband is a Civil War reenactor, so we visit the battlefields every time we go. Anyway, we're walking around and it's almost dusk, so the battlefields would be closing shortly. We wanted to walk up Little Round Top, small hill with a great view. We start up it, brother-in-law checks his watch for the time and we walk for what feels like hours. Which was weird because it's not a long walk. We finally reach the top and he checks his watch again, because we're curious how long the walk took, as it felt like forever. Watch displayed a time that was a few hours before the time when we left. Spoiler alert, this is something that I've heard many people experience there. Same trip in Gettysburg, another night we are walking back from a late dinner. Our hotel was near the battlefields, so we cut through to save time. We see a man in Civil War uniform, which is not uncommon in Gettysburg, so we think nothing of it. We pass him, say a friendly hello, he nods. Something felt off, so we turn around and that man was gone. Whatever. We still didn't think too much of it. Get to hotel, go to bed. I wake up the next morning and go to get cleaned up for the day. I have scratches up and down my arms and back. They were in clusters of 3 lines, sort of claws. No explanation to this day. Same trip, we are out at dusk again on the battlefields, this time at Triangular Field, said to be the most haunted field. I'm snapping pics, on my digital camera of course. Trying flash on and off. I snap a few with my brother-in-law out in front of me. First pic, him in small mist or something in the corner. Second pic, mist is coming into frame more. Third pic, just this mist, and I went to take a fourth pic and my camera was busted. I spent a while trying to figure it out, turning it on and off, etc. Finally I get it to snap one last pic, taken from the middle of the field looking back towards entrance. Probably the best pic I have of these types of things, a silhouette of a woman. And I knew it was a woman because she was wearing what appeared to be a large hoop skirt/dress, typical fashion from the time period, I suppose. Real quick, I do have these pictures still, I'm not sure where though. But I will look for them, and when I find them, I can post them. Smile. Finally, and most recently, I was dating a guy who lived in Staten Island. His parents had a townhome there. Apparently, the land it was built on was used as a gravesite or burial site, I'm really not too sure of the details. But he warned me that he thought the place was haunted. Walking in, nothing felt weird, nothing felt off. It was a newer home, so there were no creaky noises or anything out of the ordinary. We go to sleep that night, the central air is kicking on and off. I'm sound asleep, not dreaming, but I'm startled awake by this heavy dark figure screaming in my face. I open my eyes and there was nothing there. I wake him and he, nonchalantly says, "Yeah, that happens," as if it was the norm. Through all those experiences, I'm a believer. I think it's extremely interesting and I love ghost hunting, so to speak. I just like to try and find some evidence to show people.
Isla Lee says. This happened about 10 years ago. My ex is a carpenter and I went with him to one of his jobs in Brookfield, Connecticut. He was helping to convert a 200-year-old barn into a modern house. They had took it apart and used the old beams in the new kitchen. He told me it was quite beautiful. So, one autumn morning, I decided to go with him to see this house in person. Once we pulled up to the driveway on autumn morning, instead of following him inside, I stayed in the truck to finish my crossword puzzle. Maybe 45 minutes had passed and I heard him yell my name and to come inside. Begrudgingly, I put my crossword down, put on my jacket, and walked up the long driveway. Since the porch for the front door was incomplete, I had to enter the house through the 3-car garage. Once you step in, you see this massive kitchen with the beams in the ceiling. I stood there admiring it for about less than a minute and then crossed the kitchen to the grand entrance with the ornate stairs leading to the other floors of the house. As I stepped on the first few steps, I faintly heard footsteps behind me, as if a person was walking behind me about 10 feet away. I paused to look back but there was nothing there and chalked it up to it being a new house. As I made my way up the first landing, now it sounded like someone was maybe a foot away from me but taking louder steps. I stopped again, and there was nothing. I stepped on stair to see what would happen, and this time there was no mistaking it, it was a step but this time much louder. In absolute fear, I ran up the steps, and this thing pounded after me. I mean it was as if it was angry and it wanted to hurt someone. I was screaming when I finally reached the 3rd floor and I was running to the room where I heard my ex's miter saw whirring. When he saw me, he stopped the machine and held me. I told him that something chased me up the stairs and I started crying. Once I was done crying, he gave me some of his hot chocolate and asked me why I came up. He said he saw me in the truck down the driveway and he thought I looked too peaceful to bother me. I told him I came inside the house because he called my name. He looked at me in shock and told me he didn't. Then he directed me to the window and pointed to the truck down the driveway. He said even if he yelled as loud as he could, I wouldn't been able to hear him, because it was that far away. I looked and he was right. Something else yelled my name. Now I'm really scared, so I asked him to walk me back outside to the truck and I stayed there until it was lunchtime and asked him to take me home. I never returned to that house.
Archmage Magnus says, I used to have a recurring dream when I was 4 and 5 years old about an old man throwing me out of my room. He would angrily pick me up and march down the stairs and throw me into my parents' bedroom, which was at the bottom of the stairs. For some reason he did not want me in that room. To this day, over 30 years later, I can vividly remember the dream. When I got older, my parents told me about things sliding off tables at random, or they would come home after long weekends to find broken light bulbs in the house lamps. Our Doberman dog would constantly bark up at the stairs looking at the top and growl. When I looked into the history of the house, I found out an elderly couple had died there. The man's wife had fell asleep in the tub and had drowned. A few days later, overcome with grief, he hung himself in, which was my room. I had this reoccurring dream far before I knew anything about this at my young age, and always thought it was so creepy that a ghost could visit me and influence my dreams.
Olive Jandra says, I had some unexplained things happen to me as a kid, but not so much as an adult. Except in one house that my cousin lived in with his girlfriend, newborn and best friend. It's kind of hard to explain the setup of the basement, so I'll do my best. The stairs going down have walls on both sides, with it being down the middle of the house. On the left was a bedroom, closet and game room. The right was a little living room, the back door and the door to the laundry room. If you walked through the laundry room, you passed the washer/dryer, then a small bathroom, kind of turned by the water heater, and there was another doorway to a room. It was almost hidden, but an interesting little hangout space. We kept a wooden table all the way back in that room to hang out and not disturb the new mom and baby. One afternoon the friend and I were watching a movie out in the living room area on a broken TV. It was a little too bright to see, so I went back to the chill room and grabbed a chair from the table, brought it all the way out and used it to hang a blanket over the window, put the chair back and get back to the movie. About 20 minutes later my cousin comes down to check laundry, opens the door and asked why the FK we would leave a chair right on the other side of the door. Somehow in that short period of time that chair had been moved by something through that laundry room. We later heard a rumor that someone hung themselves in the basement, but could never find solid proof. A few other things happened there, like things going missing/being moved, random blue blurs showing up in photos of what was supposed to be the nursery for baby, voices coming over baby monitors, disembodied laughter, etc. Weirdest part for me is that these things just happened to stop when the baby was no longer in the house.
Kitten Valerie says, I used to live in a house that was brand new, saw it getting built from the ground up. A lot of things has been happening when me and my family moved there a few months after it was done getting built. I would hear dishes being moved in the sink in the middle of the night and nobody will be in the kitchen this late at night. My aunt would visit me and my family from Mexico and she would sleep in my little brother's room and she would say she doesn't want to sleep there anymore. She will hear scratches under the bed and stuff moving around in the closet and hear the closet door getting clawed. The one thing that stood out was my niece wanted to ride her bike around in the garage. Few minutes later she came out running and started crying hysterically because she saw a scary little girl with a white dress coming down from the attic we have in the garage. Family members would come stay in our house and wouldn't want to stay there anymore cause they will hear things all the time. Came to found out that the land that the house was built on top used to be a graveyard. I wasn't scared living there at all, I didn't mind that they were ghosts in our home.
Grumpy Mom says, family members moved into an old farmhouse in the Midwest. When you approached the house, you could sometimes see what looked like an Indian woman standing in the window in the attic, which was my cousin's room. My cousin started saying that someone was messing with his stuff. He would fall asleep with a book on his bed and it would be closed and on his desk when he woke up. He would fall asleep on the floor in front of the TV and would wake up with a blanket on him. His glasses would be on his nightstand if he fell asleep with them on. Lights would be turned out, etc. My aunt and uncle swore it wasn't them. We chalked it up to the nice Indian lady who lived in the attic.
Chels12345 says, I was on the Queen Mary with my fianc. We went on one of these haunted tours. Neither of us believed in the paranormal but we wanted to do the tour because it supposedly is the most haunted ship in the world and we'd thought it would be kinda fun. The tour got down to the boiler room and we were standing there listening to the tour guide when my fianc felt a chill go through him. He turned to me and said I feel so cold and I apparently looked at him in fear. Then I started to feel really faint. I felt dizzy and had like a colorful static come over my eyes. It felt like I was being pushed down. It was so fucking scary because I've never felt like that before. I've never fainted and I didn't feel faint before going down to that room. My fianc literally had to carry me out of there because I couldn't stand. Then when we got out of the boiler room, it was like a switch. I was pretty much fine. I was really shaken but physically I was fine. To this day, both of us have no explanation for what happened. We looked online at other Queen Mary experiences and the ghosts and I'm very certain that I've narrowed it down to the ghost that attacked me, but I'm not 100% sure. I'm still not 100% certain that all the paranormal stuff exists but I think there is certainly something unexplainable that happened to us and it has made me much more willing to believe in the paranormal, especially ghosts and demons.
wyoby says, I have had and heard many ghost stories all my life as Thai. But a recent story from one of my best friend is the scariest I have heard. Around a year ago, my best friend, I will call him D from now on, had to travel to the city near Bangkok to work. As a night prior he had to work late night, so he and the other two of his friends left Bangkok around midnight. D is so tired so he laid asleep on the back seat and expected to wake up on arrival. But then he woke up somewhere because the wheel was stuck on something and totally stopped. The car won't move at all so his friend, who is the driver, went down the car and checked it. Turned out a piece of truck tire was blocking the wheel. His friend was thinking nothing of it, removed it and came back to the driver's seat and moved on. So now D was awakened, he started to observe the surrounding. It is a barely two-lane dirt road without any street light. They went in deeper to the road and there are a lot of turns. After a while, the road started to get smaller to the point the banana tree on the side of the road started to hit both sides of the car. They kept on driving for so long and then the wheel was stuck again. His friend went down to check and saw the piece of truck tire block the wheel again. He removed it, got back in the car but this time he was scared. The phone connection on their phones were lost so the driver had to keep going. As the car moved, D was annoyed and he is not scared of the ghost or any shit. So, he pushed the mirror down and shouted, "If you won't stop, I will fucking curse you to hell to the darkness." Right after his last word, they all heard a long blood-curdling scream of a woman from out of nowhere directed to them. Now his driver started to lose it, the passengers started screaming, while D was shocked. The driver successfully made a U-turn, and noped the fuck out of there. On the way back out, it was just the straight road. No turn at all. And it just took them like 5 minutes to get out to the community area with lots of street food and convenience store. They called their friend who was at the destination. The place it just next to that dirt road entrance. When they arrived, he wanted to talk about it, but others refused to, so everybody just went to sleep. The next day after they finished their work, they came back to the house and met the house owner's mom. So she said the road they got in is right at the back of the house. Dee went to take a look and see a small hut with a lot of jars on the other side of the fence. Turned out it is a witch doctor house who had raised a lot of ghosts as his servants. That evening they just packed and head back to Bangkok. 2 months later, the house owner texted Dee and said that witch doctor came looking for him, asking the house owner for Dee name and said that wanna kill Dee cause of what he shouted out of the window that night. The witch doctor, who has never met Dee, described Dee appearances correctly. The house owner refused to tell him. But then the house owner sent him the video his sibling took while he was talking to the witch doctor. In the video, the house owner was standing there talking alone. No witch doctor, no one. The second time, that witch doctor came asked him about Dee again. House owner refused again. Then later the hut burned down mysteriously to the ground and that witch doctor was gone. I am not really believe in ghost, but I still shook after I heard this story. Edit, typo.
PurpleVein99 says, let me preface this by saying that while I believe there are things people experience that defy reason, I always try to find a rational explanation before immediately jumping to the conclusion that it is paranormal. That being said, there are times when I just haven't been able to find a logical explanation and am just left wondering. In any case, I'm 40. I'm gainfully employed, don't do drugs and only drink on occasion. I have 3 kids 10, 12, and 19. I've been married for 20 years, some of them good. In general I believe myself to be a good person, never willfully harming anyone and tend towards being cheerful. The earliest instance I can remember is being 6 or 7, calling for my mom because I was so thirsty. It was nighttime. I was in bed. I recall seeing my mom approach, arm extended with a glass of water. I sat up and reached for her, but my hand went right through her. I looked up at her, confused, and it wasn't my mom after all. It was another lady and she sort of just dissolved as I started. We could chalk that up to me just being addled with sleep. Moving right along. Same house. Right around the same age. We had a large, extended family and they were always coming over to visit. Aunts, uncles, cousins, friends. There always seemed to be a party going on. Noisy chatter. Kids running amok. And in the midst of this, of course, was Tio Nico. Tio Nico would sit there and grin, taking in all the noise and revelry, winking at me every now and again. Then my dad was promoted, which meant more money, and he and my mom were finally able to afford moving us out of that tiny one-bedroom house and buy our first home. Family and friends continued to come over to the new house, but after a while I realized I hadn't seen Tio Nico in some time. So I asked my parents about him and they had no idea who I was talking about. In fact, no one in the family knew. It bothered me for some time. Then years later, 10 or more, my mom tells me she ran into our old landlady. They hadn't seen each other since we'd moved out, and since we'd always been good tenants she was very happy to catch up with my mom. During the course of conversation she asked my mom whether we'd ever experienced any unusual events at the house. My mom told her no. The landlady, I think her name was Mary, said she hadn't been able to keep tenants in that house since we'd moved. She said tenants complained of seeing an old man about the place. You don't think they mean Don Nicholas, do you? She asked my mom, apparently referring to a neighbor who had passed away in his sleep in the house next to the one we used to rent. My mom was so excited to tell me she had figured out who Tio Nico was. Only thing was the guy had passed on when I was owned too, and so couldn't have been owned when I claimed to have seen him hanging owned with the family. But we can just chalk that up to coincidence, and who knows? Maybe some random, old lurker had surreptitiously hung out with us and no one but myself had noticed. So now we're on to the new family home, a 1950s, one-story ranch-style, 3-bed, 1-bath home. There was a detached garage and next to it a 2-bed, 1-bath guest house that we kids used to keep our toys and play school in. You could not stay in that guest house by yourself without feeling as if someone was watching you. The feeling was so intense that we would run out of there sometimes. My mom said we were silly, but even she wouldn't venture near it alone without one of his in tow or with my dad. At night we could hear the sound of chains drag across the concrete driveway. To date, my sister, who bought the house from my parents, says you can hear that sound. It was brought to her attention by my nieces. She flipped out about it because she remembered hearing that same sound when we were growing up in the house. My bedroom was the front room, and if I didn't close my door at night, something would walk in, stand by my bed, then walk across the room to their large, full-length mirror that was propped against the wall and knock on it. As soon as that happened, the feeling of a presence in the room was gone. I don't know or understand why a closed door would preclude this occurrence, but I soon learned it was the only way to keep it from happening. Once we woke to the sound of our parents whispering wildly. It was a strangely disquieting sound, to hear one's parents sound afraid. I jumped out of bed and ran to the living room and saw them standing by the big bay window facing the front yard and the large oak tree. Our 2 dogs, a collie mix and lab mix, were sitting facing the tree, at attention it seemed. I asked what was going on and my parents shushed me, told me to go back to bed. But I couldn't. I wanted to know what Lady and Valor were up to. Every now and again they'd turn their heads to look our way but would then turn their attention back to the tree. I heard my mom ask my dad, "Can you still see him?" And my dad nodded and pointed. I looked, straining my eyes against the darkness, and realized that there was a man leaning against the tree, just on the other side of the fence. He was wearing a long coat and a hat, and I felt cold and terrified. Who was he and why was he out there? "Call 911, I hissed. But my dad just told me again to go to bed. Frustrated and frightened, I waited beside them and must have fallen asleep at some point. I woke up in my own room, remembering the night before and wondering what the resolution had been. Somehow I forgot to ask. The day unfolded like any other and the incident completely slipped my mind. Then that night the whole thing repeated itself, and somewhere in the midst of it I got the strangest sense of déjà vu. I insisted to my parents that this same thing had already happened the night before. I even told them about the man standing by the tree. They seemed worried. Before we could discuss it further, our dogs began to bark furiously. They hurled themselves at the fence, baring their teeth, the whole bit. As we watched, the man who had been leaning against the tree seemed to grow and blend into the tree, into the darkness. The dogs stopped barking. They looked back towards us and then sauntered slowly to the porch. My dad brought them in. They were quivering. They seemed restless. It was unsettling. Over the course of the 12 or so years that I lived there, we all experienced strange things. My dad worked second shift, 3 to 1230, during the week, and my mom would do a fair amount of housework in the middle of the night and wait up for him to get home. She said she always felt watched, or as if someone was standing behind her. Pictures would fall off walls. This happened once at Thanksgiving with several family members present. Anyway, I've droned on and on. I've got so many other experiences to relate, but it's 2:30 a.m. and I'm getting sleepy. Good night, Reddit.